Hey everyone, welcome back to the Path to Purpose podcast. My name is Kieran Williams, and today I'm going to be talking about compromise and whether or not it's healthy. Well, first and foremost, my belief is that compromise can be healthy. It just depends on the approach. It also depends on what you are compromising. There are different things that you can compromise, and for example, let's look at relationships. In a relationship, you might have to make a compromise so both people are happy in the relationship. However, if the compromise is causing a shift in the complete opposite direction, then there would need to be another compromise again. For example, if one person is unhappy with a certain behavior or a trait, or maybe like the way the other person is doing something in the relationship, then of course there would need to be some kind of change that would need to happen in order to balance the scales. So it can't just go from one person to another. So now the scales have flipped. A compromise should be something that you both mutually agree on. You're not just trying to satisfy the other person's needs. So there's healthy compromise and unhealthy compromise, and I believe that's the difference. Healthy compromise is when there's balance and both parties agree. Unhealthy compromise is when one person is wanting to keep the peace, so they compromise their own happiness, their own peace for that other person. But if you can find a middle ground for both of you that you can both accept and be happy with, then that's when you're in a balanced state. And of course, if you are compromising but at the price of your happiness, then you're not doing what makes you truly happy. You might be in love in the relationship. You might feel connected to this person, but eventually it's going to wear you down because your happiness hasn't been fulfilled. This type of compromise can really affect you in the long run. And you might not notice it now, but it can take time, and it will take time. You just have to see it before you make the decision. Both people need to be willing to meet in the middle and come up with a solution that benefits both people. There needs to be some kind of mutual agreement, a mutual understanding, and the ability to listen and show respect to each other. And this is really how the dynamic of relationships tend to not work. This is why a lot of relationships come to an end. Of course, every person has their own different needs, and in their own right, they're allowed to have their own needs. But if either person in the relationship is affected, then there would need to be some kind of change. Otherwise, it will slowly infect the relationship over time. Even if in the beginning everything seems fine, there needs to be complete clarity on what you are compromising, no matter what it is. If there's some kind of a disagreement in the relationship and you have to compromise because the other person is not happy, then the idea is that you bring yourself both to a position where you can still be happy in that relationship. Now, of course, I'm not a relationship expert, but this does really apply to every type of relationship in life. And everything I'm sharing is completely from just my perspective, what I'm kind of receiving and feeling and what resonates with me. So even with friends and family, even if there is a certain expectation that is being held towards another person, then you may also expect that person to compromise what they are doing based on your expectation of them. So actually, compromise sometimes requires both people to let go of expectations and embrace acceptance. This looks at compromise from a completely different angle because if what we're expecting the person to change is potentially going against their truth and against their authentic self, then that person might not be fully embracing themselves anymore in that relationship when they're with you. If you're expecting them to change and be a certain way that you don't like, or you're expecting something that they do to change, but maybe they find it really difficult to do, or maybe it's not even possible for them right now to make that change, then the whole time they're in that relationship, they might be just trying to keep the peace with you, to try and create happiness within the relationship at the cost of a compromise that is not healthy. Hopefully, from what I'm saying, you get the idea of how compromise can be healthy and how it also can't be healthy. It really just depends on how acceptant you are, how understanding you are, and the willpower you have, and also just maintaining your truth and authenticity is so important that you really are clear with each other, because every relationship to some degree is going to have difficulties, but it depends on both people's ways of looking at it, both people's same understandings. Like if you're on the same understanding as each other, there's so many things that need to work, and that's why communication is so important. Because if the other person has to change to make you happy, it might not be making them happy. It might be changing their openness towards you. And this is why it's so important to look within and ask yourself if you really expect them to change, or is there something within you that needs to change in terms of your perspective? Ask yourself why this compromise needs to happen. Allow yourself to explain that, and explain that to them, and give them the opportunity to explain their side to you. Because at the end of the day, everything within a relationship boils down to communication. With communication and understanding from both people, compromise can be easy, because we can understand and accept why they might be behaving in a certain way. We can understand why the other person might be feeling a certain way, so we can understand how we can best benefit them. And when we're in a state of complete understanding, it then becomes easier for us to accept without trying to do it just to keep the other person happy. And yet the whole time that we're keeping this other person happy, in the back of our minds, we know that it's not actually what we want, and it sits there because we're sort of holding it back. So that's why coming to an understanding is so important. And I hope what I'm saying makes sense. And this also gives us a true reflection to whether or not the person is someone we are still operating on the same frequency with. If two people's mindsets and outlook of life are completely different, then of course this operates like the frequency of a radio. If the frequency of a radio on one person is, say, like 96, and then on the other person it's 84, of course they're going to not be able to hear each other, because it's like when you tune a radio and all of a sudden the sound starts to go a bit muffled because you're not tuned in correctly. And this is how relationships can be. If you're both on different frequencies, you're not going to be able to hear each other. And sometimes it's healthier to go in the opposite direction if you don't match. If your frequency is different to that other person, then it just is that way. Because if the changes that we want in a relationship, that we need for ourselves, aren't shifting, then this is when it becomes unhealthy. And it's very hard for us to realize this when we're in love. But the sooner we realize it, the sooner we acknowledge it and navigate through it and make a decision, that will relieve the tension that we've been holding on to. And again, I felt very inspired to talk on this topic today. It was something that just came up within me recently, and I felt the need to share that with you all. Sometimes I just have a topic that comes into mind and it just feels right to share it. So even if it helps just one of you, I'm grateful that I was able to come up with this idea and give you guys some insight to try and realign your thoughts, or give you a bit of a shift in perspective. So as always, thank you so much for listening to today's episode, and I hope there's something you can take with you on your journey, or should I say on your path to purpose. And I will catch you all in the next episode.